Hello! Today I am going to talk about some basic techniques for working with camera feedback and internal feedback using video mixers. And some assorted other things about the hardware and signal paths involved. It's mostly just like you have a camera and you have a mixer and what can you do with these things? Cool. So first off, let's switch this over to just the camera, and then I'll go through and just show you all the equipment that I'm working with right now. Okay, so camera that is being used is this is like an RCA, what do you call it? An RCA consumer grade solid-state image sensor VHS camcorder. I'm a huge fan of this one in particular, and I've had several other RCA ones in the past that I've enjoyed. RCA is notable for being a corporation founded by the Navy to develop radio technology, and also for being some of the most aggressive patent trolls in early television and radio technology history. You can look up Eric P. Dollard on YouTube if you want some more fun or revisionist electrical engineering history along those lines. They have a interesting history with the RCA Corporation. Television screen I'm using right here, and you can see this. Its camera's coming out through here. The television I'm using is a Sony Trinitron. It has a glitch up here that you can see where there's just these weird little bands of blue, green, and red, and some sort of strange screen overflow thing that happens. I don't really know what's going on with that. If anybody does, let me know. It's pretty rad though, and I like to have it in the video feedback. And to be honest, those red, green, and blue lines don't really bother me at all. And then the video mixer I'm using is is a Panasonic Digital AV Mixer WJ-AVE7. So this is, I think the AVE5 is the more common version of this. Not exactly sure what the difference is, but this is a pretty great, the AVE mixers in general are, I think, a pretty great mixer to start out with. They have really nice internal feedback. They have really nice switching, and everything is really just easily accessible on the outside here. There's no digital menus to jump in. I'm compositing everything else in together through Roland V4EX, but I'm not really going to be doing too many effects on here. I'm just using this to composite this little camera thing with the Panasonic output. And I'm also using it to show an interesting signal chain thing you can do. So I'm running this signal in out to this TV, and then there's a pass-through on the back. This is terribly directed. I apologize. There's a pass-through on the back, and I'm running that signal back into the Panasonic. So there's two internal lines on the Panasonic. I'm going to stop pointing this camera around because it's probably just dizzying at this point. There's two internal lines on the Panasonic. The one internal line in the background right now is just the S-video output coming back into an S-video input. Then there's another internal line on here that's the pass-through, the output of this, which is going through the composite into the Roland, into the TV, and then through the TV into here. And I'll show you the difference between that right now. That is the internal feedback line being passed through the Roland and the CRT. And you can see there's a really drastic difference in these internal feedback lines. Just goes to show that video feedback is an inherently chaotic situation, and one of the defining features of chaos is that making tiny changes in like in how things are set up is going to have drastic results in the chain. And this is just one really obvious and aesthetically pleasing way to illustrate that. It's kind of funny. Oh yeah, I guess it's not kind of funny. The composite, the P&P is on the Roland, so there's no interaction between the P&P and feedback when it's just the internal line, but there is this kind of hilarious interaction over here where my face turns into reaction diffusion worms. Okay, cool. So, first off, let's just take a look at the camera and the screen. Oh yeah, another thing about this screen is the nice thing about broadcast televisions and Trinitrons is that the older ones, can you see any of this? Is the autofocus just focusing on the dirtiness of the lens? There's a bunch of knobs on here that you can control. Let me get some lighting. Wow. I'm terribly prepared for this. There we go. So there's a lot of knobs on here. It's really nice to have analog control over your screen's qualities while you're doing feedback, while you're doing camera feedback. So the aperture has to do with the aperture grill. I'm not really going to go into that, but it sort of is like, can be thought of similar to resolution. Brightness is obvious. Chroma is obvious. Phase will go into like what the phase does. Contrast is obvious, and volume means nothing to us right now because this is a video feedback thing. Okay, so let's just start with some basic video feedback stuff. So everything on the screen right now is set to noon, which means it shouldn't be like attenuating anything. So this is, theoretically speaking, like gonna be like the most like clean, undisturbed image. Of course it isn't. It's radically different. You can just notice one immediate, like, striking difference. So if we look at this screen, and then we look at where it's being captured over here. Can we see this? You can notice that the CRT is just way darker where it's darker, whereas the digital capture has, like, less range into total darkness, and that's just because of how CRTs work. CRTs are better at showing you black, and they're better at high contrast. LCD screens are constantly, every aspect of an LCD screen is backlit all the time, whereas a CRT is not constant, like not every like pixel on the screen is lit at every point. That's why you can get like way better dramatic contrast ranges when you're working with CRT displays. So yeah, let's just start playing around. So, one really handy technique for doing camera feedback when you want to match your camera up with the screen is to, if you have pretty much any mixer will have like some sort of like, either like a black and white or a hue, black and white, brightness inversion, hue inversion, or both in one. This is just a brightness inversion. You can tell because none of the colors are like doing that flicker as well. Yeah, so just using this is a nice way to like center. You can like, if you want to have like things twisted around or askew, you can use this as a pretty handy, just like, I don't know, what do you call it, like a plumb line or like a level or just one of those tool kind of things. You notice that there's a lot of color happening in this black and white inversion, and it doesn't really make sense, obviously, where this color is coming from. But it seems to be just sort of like this like accident from like averaging out the noise values of all these like the black and whites. So how the camera is sensing things, if you've read the other article that I'll have linked to in the bottom of here, the way the camera is sensing things is it sort of has to like, zoomed in a bit, so it's averaging out like these pixels, or these, I'll just think of them as pixels even though it's not technically a pixel on a CRT. But say the camera is sensing, it's trying to figure out, oh, what's this color right here? Half of, or 3/4 of it is black and 1/4 of it is white. At some point in the signal chain, it's just like averaging out these black and white values and like giving you this color distortion as an artifact, which is being amplified as you go down the feedback chain. So if you look at like, here, I'm controlling the iris on this to try to get to a stage where there's more or less color, but I don't think that's going to happen here. But I can turn down the chroma on the screen. Turning down the chroma on the screen is going to give you a black and white. And you can see a very common thing happening in the back here, which is strobing. It can be hard to get away from strobing when you're doing black and white black and white feedback. There's a couple of techniques, mostly to do like I'm gonna turn down the iris on this, squeeze it down, and you lose dynamic range, but you lose the strobing as well. And then I can kind of like wiggle it around and get like some reaction diffusion lines, like wormy business settling down. I think that is coming off of the weird overscan thing at the top, which is one reason I like to have it. There's something I like about screens with like obvious like flaws is that they can be very handy for like sort of like accidental feedback stuff. Yeah, so let me turn chroma back up. Let me turn off negative. And then let's look at something fun that phase can do. So I'm going to turn chroma all the way up. So chroma is being blasted. And I'm going to start to dial up phase more. So phase is about 2 o'clock right now. Now let me just get it all the way. And check it out. We have hue cycling. This is pretty great. Really not much more to say about that. But if you have phase control and you mess around with everything nice, you get a really nice, spectacular hue cycling effect. What else? Here, I can show you what happens to the... Let's try to isolate. I'll turn down the phase again. And turn chroma back down to noon. Okay. And then here, we turn contrast all the way up. Right? Not too much all the way up. And then let me change aperture. Let's see if we can notice anything different in the display. It might be kind of difficult with camera feedback going on, so I'll switch to an internal line. Let's switch to the straight up internal line of the Panasonic. And so here's aperture all the way up. And then I'm slowly turning it down. Oh wait, you're not going to see this on the capture. That would have to be like a camera involved. There's not like a crazy difference I'm seeing in anything, so don't worry about it. Not going to edit this out, but... Let's see, other fun things we can do with the camera feedback. So there's these standard effects that a lot of mixers will have. What do we got here? So, negative, paint, mosaic, strobe, and still. Still and strobe are pretty much exactly what you'd expect. I'll show you some fun things you can do with the internal line. Mosaic means pixelate, which is, a fun way to think about pixelization in terms of like you're making some sort of like Byzantine iconography. One thing I don't really like about this brand of Panasonic mixers is that like you have to like digitally step through the digital effects on here. So like if I can't just like turn on pixel the mosaic up to 1 and then turn it back down. You have to step through everything. So if you want to do this sort of thing in a live setting, you want to figure out like how to mix channels back and forth so like you're not like always having to like run through every value of pixel. Okay, let's also take a look at paint. Paint kind of, I guess, smears things around. Let me turn the brightness down a bit. So paint's kind of smeary. Maybe, I don't know if it's going to be immediately apparent. You can see it right now. It sort of looks like a posturization effect, or like when you take an image and convert it into like, so you take like a high resolution ping and convert it like into like, I don't know, like some like a GIF or like a way old version of JPEG, and it does this sort of like dithering, like this really quantized dithering. That's what the paint effects gives you, and it just sort of like blobs things, like digitally blobs things out more and more as you go up. And that's paint turned off. Do strobe with the feedback. You can slow things down, which sometimes you need to do when you are in camera feedback. But this you'll find kind of not fun to use because of stepping through all the way. Still does exactly what you would think. Just stops it. And that's thankfully just on and off. I don't know what else it could possibly do. Alright, so next let's look at internal feedback. So internal feedback on a mixer just means you're plugging the output into an input. And you can either do that directly, or you can like pass that signal through any number of things. Like I have the two signals. One is just a direct out into a direct in, and the other one is passing through the Roland and the Trinitron and then back in. This is the direct in, and so the Panasonic AVE series are known for having just really generally like colorful, dramatic, and fun internal feedback lines. And then I'll just run through these effects here, and you can see how they affect the internal feedback. So here's negative going on, and you can see it's negative the brightness, and it sort of affects like our perception. From our perception value, it seems to affect saturation as well. That's a funny little line there. Wonder what that's doing. So yeah, that's negative. Negative is pretty fun, always. It can be a way to make your colors pop out more if everything's too dark, is to do the negative. Sometimes it'll make it, depending on what you're working at, it'll make it do a lot of strobing, and you want to figure out some sort of like blurring or defocusing way to get rid of that. Here's the paint effect. You can notice the paint effect a bit more heavy. It sort of, the internal feedback line amplifies this like digital like clunkiness of the paint effect. So this is paint all the way up, I believe, and that's paint off again. Mosaic is pretty fun. It turns everything into rainbow pixel zones. And it speeds everything up a lot, too, because there's just less image to process. See, Mosaic is, like, pretty far up, and it's just like, gone! Then I had to pass through all the other sizes of Mosaic before I got back. Strobe definitely can come in handy with internal feedback lines, because it just, like, gives you a chance. If you're mixing it with something else and you don't want... Like, you have a very strobing thing, or not as, like when you something strobing on and off, like a light or a saturation or a hue or something, you can use the strobe effect to not have it be like pulsing your eyes at an epileptic seizure triggering sort of thing, or like some sort of like those visual binaural Beats glasses things. Although, I mean, that stuff seems kind of fun too. And yeah, so then I'll show you how they work with the pass-through line as well, because these are like, I would say these two are like two of the very like basic sorts of internal feedback lines you would get. I mean, there's a lot of different ways they show, but this one where it's just like the color blobs that like up here and just like do like this sort of like very coarse-grained, like diffusion sort of thing. This looks more like a heat diffusion kind of thing, but with like instead of the heat diffusion like blobbing out like that, it's angled at a way, and that's because of the how an SD signal is multiplexed. Why you get that sort of angle at all times. When we turn this one on, you see there's a different angle, and it's more sharp. There's a lot more time involved in this one because one, the Roland V4EX seems to do a lot of digital processing, like on the SD signal, and two, it's being sent on a longer route. It's not going directly in and out from the mixer. This is going into another mixer. It's getting processed by that time-based corrector. It's getting sent back out and into a television where it's just like a pass-through line, but it's still a difference in the signal. And then it's coming back here. And you can see that will result in this way sharper like reaction diffusion kind of stuff. It's there's just like that like noticeable distance, like the trails, so like this noticeable distance here is basically like that's how long it's taking the signal to be reconstructed. And I'm just gonna like play with this for a second because this is really satisfying to see. So here's one really fun way to integrate camera feedback and internal feedback. It's just this sort of like P&P kind of deal. We're like very like discreetly mixing the signals together. Like there's a sharp edged line there, and it's just going to grab the edge. The internal line is just grabbing the edge of this camera feedback and like just turning it into like these like fun worms. But in a second, I'll show you some more ways to integrate the two kinds of feedback. Okay, that was fun. And I'm going to pause this video for a second, and I will be right back.